While Pixar remains a beloved animation studio, it's hard to ignore that the output over the previous decade has been largely seen as lesser than what they created in the 90s and 2000s. Though Inside Out and Coco appear near the top of people's Pixar rankings, and the recent Toy Story sequels were also highly acclaimed. However, it's not unusual to see the refrain that this was good, but not one of their best. There are also movies people automatically dismiss as being below them. I don't really agree with this, though, and I still find Pixar continues to produce strong animated films that will stand the test of time. I'm going to look at their recent works and try to figure out why people think Pixar has gone downhill. This dissatisfaction with Pixar seems to have started with their 2011 release, Cars 2. Even in what is considered Pixar's golden era, Cars was seen as a lesser film, so Cars 2 had an uphill battle with the studio's fans. It did not help that it went in a wildly different direction from the first movie, by both becoming a spy comedy and making Mater the lead. It was also accused of being made because of the popularity of Cars merchandise. Coming off the emotions of Toy Story 3, I can understand where the viewer's disappointment came from. At that point, Pixar was known for making films that made the audience cry, and tapped into something deeper with their stories and themes. Cars 2 dared to just be a fun romp, and you know what? I think the Pixar filmmakers are allowed to do that from time to time. Admittedly, one's enjoyment of Cars 2 does lie with your tolerance for Mater. I don't mind Mater though, and I was able to get into the spy movie hijinks of the film. The best way to watch Cars 2 is to remember the stories we came up with when we were children and playing about toy cars on the carpet. That appears to be what John Lasseter was tapping into in the movie, and him, the story artists and animators, did put together some impressive action sequences, in my opinion. People have come to expect more than just fun from Pixar at this point, but I don't think placing the studio into a box is fair. I'm going to jump ahead a bit to their newest film, Onward, and the pre- and post-release reaction to the movie. When the trailers appeared for Onward, I kept seeing remarks that it did not look like a Pixar film. This confused me as the character design still had that signature Pixar appearance, and the mix of fantasy and modern in the setting was somewhat reminiscent of Monsters, Inc., which makes sense as Dan Scanlon previously directed Monsters University. And when the movie was released, it had the hallmarks we often associate with Pixar. Two characters go on a road trip where they encounter various obstacles, and there's an emotional element at stake, resulting in a touching finale. So the notion that Onward did not seem like a Pixar film turned out to be rather silly in the end. That got me to thinking about Pixar being placed in a box. That's not really fair to the filmmakers there, as they should have the freedom to tell whatever story they see fit. I also don't think we should be pigeonholing their directors and designers and requiring they make a film a specific way. That's incredibly restricting to any artistic medium, and does not allow for growth and evolution. If we want Pixar to continue making original films, we cannot immediately follow it up with, no, not like that. I also want to take a moment to talk about the sequels produced by Pixar over the past decade. Yes, they've made a lot of them, but the filmmakers have not skimped on the storytelling that made the originals so special. The neat thing about the Pixar sequels is they do grow the characters and explore new themes. Yet Finding Dory and Incredibles 2 are accused of paling in comparison to their predecessors. It is tricky living up to the many years of anticipation for these next installments, as well as the multiple viewings audiences have had of the originals, but I think these movies pull them off. In the case of Finding Dory, making Dory the lead allowed Andrew Stanton to tastefully explore the subject of disabilities. Dory's disability was used to show the character's strengths, and how it's not something she should be embarrassed by, which I'm sure must have been meaningful to so many viewers. The use of flashbacks also allowed Finding Dory to differentiate itself from Finding Nemo. Stanton had originally intended to use flashbacks in the first movie to slowly reveal how Nemo's mother died, but realized it did not work. However, this method of storytelling proved a lot more fitting for Dory's search for her parents, and also added to the emotions that came from their reunion. I also thought Incredibles 2 did a lot of brilliant things with its storytelling. I see the film sometimes dismissed as just a reversal of the roles Bob and Helen Parr had in the first movie, but I disagree with that assessment. Bob's struggle with watching over the children and not being the hero of the hour, in addition to trying to mend his relationship with his daughter, gave him something different than what he experienced in the first movie, and definitely was not part of Helen's arc. Meanwhile, Elastigirl taking on hero work also comes with the added motivation of wanting to change superhero rights. There was some disappointment that Brad Bird did not do a time skip, but that ignores the hanging thread from the end of The Incredibles that superheroes are still illegal. I like how the desire to change the law was the main theme of the sequel, and its message of human rights is definitely relevant to today. The discovery of Jack's powers also allowed Bird to tap into new sources of comedy, and he took advantage of the evolution in technology and his period directing live-action films to add a new dynamic to the action scenes. The strangest phenomenon I've seen among those who did not love Incredibles 2 was this need to teach Brad Bird about character growth and story structure. I think Brad Bird, of all people, knows a thing or two about writing a well-structured screenplay. Thank you very much. He does not need a lecture. Cars 3 also tackled some major themes, although that was dismissed as just another Cars movie. There's the obvious one of Lightning McQueen coping with young race cars entering his profession, and him being delegated to veteran status, and the effect that has on him. However, most powerful was his trainer Cruz Ramirez's arc. The film's not afraid to address the struggles many face, whether they're women or minority, as they try to achieve their dreams. Considering Cars 3 was released only a few months before it was publicly revealed that the Pixar workplace was not quite as idyllic as we were led to believe, that added another layer to the film and really felt like the filmmakers were not just talking about the sports world. On an entirely different note, Cars 3 did seem to sense the dissatisfaction many had with Cars 2, as it returned to the tone of the first Cars, and the events of that sequel were not even mentioned. That's somewhat admirable at least, and I think Brian Fee deserves more credit for how he directed Cars 3. I will admit I was not the biggest fan of Monsters University, but it's certainly not a bad film by any means. If I consider that to be the weakest feature film in the Pixar catalog, they're doing something right. The themes in Monsters University, especially where it went in the ending, were certainly daring for a family film. Prequels are just difficult to write, as audiences already know the outcome of the characters, and as a result, the filmmakers are restricted in where to take them. The other challenge with Monsters University is that we've already seen what Mike and Sully are like as friends, and their camaraderie was pivotal to the success of Monsters, Inc. The story created for Monsters University has them bicker and quarrel through most of the runtime, and that's not nearly as charming. But I've also seen the movie referred to as awful and just an 80s college movie, and I definitely would not go that far. There's still plenty of the creativity we associate with Pixar, most notably with the designs. Brave and The Good Dinosaur are what I often see put into the mediocre category, but they also have a lot to offer. I did the defense of The Good Dinosaur last year, but simply put, I think that's one that deserves another look by most people. It's a differently paced movie than we've come to expect from family films nowadays, and the Western motif was a clever way of depicting the dinosaur-inhabited environment. The perception of Brave seems to suffer from people thinking it's more like a Disney movie. Why? Because the lead is a princess? This sort of goes back to my argument of people putting Pixar into a box. Why should they not be allowed to make a film with a princess in the lead role? Merida's motivation is not even that similar to the Disney princesses like Ariel, Belle, and Rapunzel. Merida is not a princess looking for more. She just wants her mother to lay off her back and accept that, hey, I like shooting bows. She's a typical teenager, and I guess that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Now, Brave, The Good Dinosaur, and Cars 2 did run into difficulties in that the original director was replaced midway through production. But it's not like this is the first time this has happened. Ratatouille notably replaced Jan Pinkava with Brad Bird, who then retooled almost the entire movie. There actually seems to have been less of this over the past number of years, with Lee Unkrich, Brian Fee, and Dan Scanlon being allowed to direct their films to completion. I next want to talk about the unnecessary expectations placed on Pixar with the release of each new movie. Has Pixar made many brilliant movies? Absolutely. I love the large majority of their output. WALL-E is my favorite Pixar movie, but I don't walk into every Pixar film requesting WALL-E every single time. That puts way too much pressure on them to create a masterpiece every time out. They've been producing feature films for 25 years now, and they're not always going to score 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. If you feel their newest effort is worth a 7 out of 10, you don't need to follow that up by saying, but it's not one of their best. I've noticed this mostly happens with Pixar though. When DreamWorks or Blue Sky or Sony Animation make a film that's considered good, they're greeted with congratulations and praise. When Pixar makes a film that's considered good, it's seen as a betrayal and beneath their abilities. Guess what? A good Pixar film is still a good film, and you got your money's worth. This brings me to my next point, which actually only hit me after reading an excellent article by blogger and animation enthusiast Kyle O. Titled Pixar or Just for Guys, this article touched on something interesting about the studio and their reception. When people name their favorite Pixar movies, they're often directed by the same filmmakers: Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, Brad Bird, and Lee Unkrich. John Lasseter too, although that's reserved for the Toy Story movies rather than the Cars pictures he directed. He makes a good point that maybe it's not necessarily Pixar the studio that people love, but rather the animated movies made by these specific directors. You can find common themes between their movies after all, as well as specific ways they tap into our emotions. Kyle is right in that it's unfair to look for an Andrew Stanton movie from Dan Scanlon, or a Brad Bird film from Peter Sohn. These are individuals with their own talents and tastes and influences. We also don't know where their careers will lead and what stories they might want to tell in the future. Scanlon's feature directing debut may have been a prequel with already established characters, but he then created his own characters and world with Onward, and I was very impressed. The Good Dinosaur originated as Bob Peterson's project, but Peter Sohn was able to steer the film to the finish line, and I look forward to the day he gets to direct a feature of his own devising. I earlier praised Brian Fee's work on Cars 3, and I'm curious what he directs next. Pete Docter, under his recently appointed role as the creative head of Pixar, also appears to be shepherding new talent at the studio. I love the short film Bao, so the upcoming Pixar project I am most excited to see is the feature that Dami Shi is currently developing. Pixar seems to be entering a new era, one which they promise to be more reliant on original ideas than sequels, so there's a world of possibilities on the horizon. In the meantime, I do very much like what the studio's filmmakers crafted in the 2010s. Whether it was a sequel or a new concept, each brought something to the table worth admiring. These are films I'll continue to revisit and find new things to appreciate in their direction, writing, design, and animation. I don't believe in a Pixar comeback, because frankly, they never left. See you next time.